Hi, I'm Sam, your inner voice and self-trust coach for women who refuse to choose between career success and being fully present with their kids. This is Journal Entries, where we break free from self-sabotage, reconnect with our inner wisdom, and live truly fulfilled lives in both of our roles. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to Journal Entries. This week, I sit down with my guest, Alyssa Rose. She is a grief coach who recently did a TEDx talk. She says that grief isn't just about death, but it lives in every goodbye, every transition, and every transformation that we experience. Alyssa creates spaces where women can honor everything that they carry, from career disappointments and relationship endings to unrealized dreams and identity shifts. In this episode, we even talk about how we can grieve what we thought life was going to be like, which I talk a lot about when I went through my divorce. Alyssa shows us how to create meaningful personal communities and rituals where big feelings are not just allowed, but celebrated as evidence of our capacity to love deeply. Alyssa's approach to belonging teaches us that community isn't found, but created through brave conversations and shared vulnerability. We talk a lot about all of that, plus the 5 gates to grief, agreements that we make with ourselves, and how to approach the mindset of, quote unquote, I don't want to go there when we experience big emotions so that we can get the relief and the support that we need. I know you're going to love Alyssa's sweet, knowledgeable, and gentle approach to this topic. So send this episode to someone you know who's experiencing grief or going through a life transition. And also consider downloading the Calm Mind Blueprint in the show notes to help you begin to journal through your own grief. All right, let's dive in. Welcome to Journal Entries. Today we have Alyssa with us. Welcome to the show, Alyssa.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I am so excited. Alyssa reached out to me on Instagram and just told me a teensy bit about what she does. And then right before pressing record on this, she shared a little bit more about the scope of work, and I am so excited. In a nutshell, the word is grief that she teaches on and explores. So Alyssa, do you just want to share a little bit more about this, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty?
Yeah, thanks. I'm a grief guide and life transitions doula, but when it comes to grief, I feel really committed to creating a more grief literate culture. And when I say grief, I'm really talking about all the changes, things that we feel connected to all the big changes that happen in our lives, big and small changes. So definitely physical death, but also life transitions, moving, taking a new job or leaving an old job, relationship shifts and identity shifts, and so many more types of changes we might experience in a lifetime.
There are so many too, which I honestly didn't realize because I used to be this like positive Polly or Pam or Patty or whatever the name that is. I would like only focus on positivity and like being so optimistic that when I thought of grief, I really only thought of like a physical loss. And now that I've been through divorce, that's a whole form of loss that we could go into. And just now that I'm older, I've witnessed other people going through grief. And I feel like my first initial reaction to grief is that's so tough. It's a hard topic. Do you feel like that too? When you speak to people, is it hard to get people to open up about grief, or is it a situation where people just are ready to spill the beans and open up about it?
Really good questions. And you're right. That is very common. The association with the word grief can just be, hard and negative, and there can be aversion and resistance to like wanting to go there.
Yeah.
And it's really different for different people. Some people are like, I don't have that. But I find that if we expand our idea about what grief is, that it can really shift our perspective on many other kinds of conditions and experiences we have as humans. Like often there is untended grief within anxiety, within depression, within fear that's blocking us from living the lives we want, fear in taking action. There's grief in all of these other, like grief kind of buried in all of these other names for things that we haven't always, pulled out, teased out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, grief. When I'm working with grief and when I'm really trying to like support our expanded understanding of grief, I lean really heavily on what Francis Weller calls the 5 gates of grief. And that to me has like really opened my mind to where grief can live. And so those 5 gates, and they're called gates because they're ways back into ourselves. They're like a revealing of ourselves, a knowing of ourselves in the deeper, more intimate ways. So the first gate is everything I love, I will lose. And to me, I found that through Buddhism and the idea of impermanence. It's like everything I love, I will lose or be separated from, or it will change form. So grief connected to that. So gate number 2 is the places of me that have not known love, or the places where there's shame. There's potentially my own shame, my own judgment, parts of me that I've been like, I don't want anyone else to know about or see. The grief associated with that kind of fracturing and that kind of self-judgment and criticism.
Yeah.
We go into another gate, which is the collective sorrows of the world. How do we be aware of what's happening globally, and like let ourselves be heartbroken by that without letting it completely drive us down into cycles of despair that we can't get out of, or that we become unable to continue functioning in our closest relationships and our personal lives. The 4th gate is the one that shows up most in my life and also in my practice, which is the grief associated with not getting what we expected. And that one is huge. I notice that a lot with people coming in who've grown up with a really strong religious background, but maybe left that religion of just like, I thought that, was promised this. And it's the same with careers. Like I was promised if I worked at this company or in this profession that I would feel X, Y, or Z thing. Or as a mom, I thought my family would look like this. And it, like, that's a huge one for me. And I do get a lot of clients coming in because they're like, oh, there's been a death. But when we tug on that, when we like sit with that, actually there's so much in this gate that comes to life. And then the 5th gate is ancestral grief, what we show up here with, maybe not even knowing what our ancestors experienced and didn't experience, what they were able to express and not express. There is another gate that is being explored and talked about now, which is around the harm that I've done. But yeah, so those are some of the ways in for me around grief and expanding our understanding of grief, and starting to tease apart, okay, actually there's some untended feelings here that are connected to some changes that have happened in my life.
Yeah, a lot of feelings. Each one of those I felt like could open up a whole can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
Do you deal with each one of the gates differently? Like, is there a different approach to healing the grief and other emotions that come up within each gate? Are there different approaches for that? Or is it kind of the same approach, just different situations that come up?
Great question. And honestly, it can change a lot. Like sometimes it's needed or asked for that we create a container specific to eco grief and the grief we are walking with around what's happening to our Mother Earth, right? Sometimes I'm creating spaces or containers that are around physical death or are around becoming a parent or around losing a pregnancy or a child. Though often I'm also creating ritual spaces that hold all of these types of loss because they are really interwoven and they're not always as separate as we can pull them out to be. There's a need, I think, and benefit for both, having spaces that are really defined and refined and put you in a place with others who have gone through something similar or are going through something very similar. And then there's beauty also and medicine also in these spaces that are wider, like are more open. And so in the circle, we together are grieving a lot of these different pieces.
I think it's so beautiful what you do, and connecting the different kinds of grief. As you were sharing the different gates, I was jotting down a few that came to my mind. So when you were talking about the sorrows of the world, I wrote politics. As of right now at Facebook, I just see so many people so invested in both beliefs, and like heated comments, and people getting really, just involved emotionally into that. And I also wrote down miscarriage, which I know so many women struggle with. And then I thought that feels so heavy to me, and so much different than the fourth gate that you mentioned, which is, the how different your life could have been almost, which I was telling you before I pressed record of, for me, that's a lot of my divorce is what I expected my life to be like and what I thought life with my family unit, would be like. But something that my mom says, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, she says there's no hierarchy to grief. So you can grieve, the loss of the life that you thought you would have just as much as a miscarriage, just as much as the loss of, an organ if you had to get that removed, or the loss of a pet is such a very real thing too. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and how they are woven together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's so true. And we're impacted really differently. As one person going through our lives, where we might experience the same loss at a different stage so differently, or two people might be experiencing grief in completely different ways around the same loss. And it's so unique. It's so unique, but it's also completely universal. Grief is a universal human response, and human experience is very natural. But it's really unique depending on many, many things. And I actually really do agree with your mom about there not being a hierarchy. It can be very challenging for people who are in hot, acute grief to be around others experiencing that level of hot grief, but connected to different kinds of losses. That can be challenging. It can also be challenging because we can be very critical and judgmental of our own grief, of like, is mine big enough? Is it okay that I go to a grief circle if I'm just in quotes grieving this loss where someone else has a bigger loss? That's like a really common experience. And so I'm really supportive of and encouraging of like us tending our grief in all the different forms, in all the different sizes. There's not a right or wrong shape. I think that as we come into circles together and we get to hear each other's stories, we learn so much about the human experience. We can expand our capacity for compassion and empathy. I've worked with clients who've lost pets, and I haven't ever had pets that I have been so bonded to. We had pets growing up, but I, as an adult, haven't had a pet that I have felt so connected to. And when I'm with my clients grieving their animals who were so close to them, it's really expanded my capacity to understand and to feel with and understand the impact and the love that is still and has been there and is still being expressed. It's just with loss in this way, our love and the way we give and receive love changes form, and it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. But anyways, I do agree with your mom about there not being a hierarchy and there being benefit to certain circles that are more focused around a certain type of loss, and other circles that are wider.
So tell us more about these circles, and then also, and it might be related to the grief rituals that you do. Kind of like, what is that and what does that look like?
Yeah. So I work with people one to one, and I also work with people in groups, and I love both. And I find that there is a medicine only available in the grief work, in the group grief work, the community grief tending. Often when we're grieving, there's been a disconnection, a break in connection. And so when we create a container where we feel connected and held and we're creating safety together, and we start to feel like, okay, there's containment that's being held outside of me having to hold it for myself, there's an invitation into deeper feeling and deeper expression. There's also an important part in the grief circles and rituals around being witnessed, being witnessed and being held. So there's a containment that is available when we're in a community space, and a witnessing that is also available and really important for grief to move through and out of us, be expressed through us, and for us to not be held, for us to not be identified with what is shared. It's important that we as the community can hold people navigating grief as dynamic and in process, not as whatever they said when they were in the heat of grief, right?
Oh, I
So
love that.
that's a really important piece of like, we are in flow, we are in process, we are in movement, and this is a really important piece of healing and of wellness, in my opinion, of being able to express and be witnessed, and to kind of come back again and again. And so for me, the grief rituals that I attend and host are inspired by Sobonfu Somé and the people of her tribe, the Dagara people in West Africa. She and Maladoma Somé were sent to the United States to help us modern Westerners remember how to grieve, because it was a really intricate, important part of their tradition, their culture, their world. And they understood the importance of grieving. They understood that when we grieve, like, the individual grieving and having space to grieve is a really, really key piece of the health of the whole community. And so they came to the United States to help teach us and help us remember how to grieve. And so for me, I host circles in Portland, Oregon, and have hosted shorter, kind of just like 2 hours on a Tuesday night rituals, which are little drops in, right? But ideally, we can have some longer spaces. I've hosted 10-hour and weekend rituals as
Wow.
well. We have 2 weekend rituals. I have 2 weekend rituals coming up this year where we can go a lot deeper and in the style of and a tradition of Sobonfu Somé. There's a village that we are creating, because we often right now are in spaces where we don't feel like such a strong sense of village, right? So we're doing a little bit more of that creating of the village, and then taking turns. Like we're drumming and we're singing and we're moving, and then as you feel grief kind of surfacing, you go up to the grieving altar where you do a lot of grieving there, and then you come back to the village and you again participate in the village. And we're kind of taking turns in going and grieving when that's up for you, and having one person comes and is a support directly with you, and then returning to the village and then finding, oh wait, I actually feel really strong right now and I can be a support person for someone else who's grieving. So there's this really important dance and shift between like, I need help, I am so distraught and so upset and so deeply in my grief, into like finding, releasing, and then finding ourselves back in the village and finding ourselves like, oh, I can support my people, my village as well. And so that's been a really beautiful piece, and that's one type of ritual that I host. And the other type is, so that's what we'll be doing in the summer at a weekend grief ritual in Portland this summer. And then I also host an annual grief ritual at the Oregon coast in November. And it happens before Thanksgiving so that we can really touch into what we're grieving as we then open up towards the Thanksgiving and to the celebration and to the end of the year, all of these pieces. So we're at the Oregon coast where it is dreary and stormy and gray, and it's just right next to the ocean, like floor to ceiling windows and we're at the ocean. And that space is much more of a like beautiful, quiet, peaceful space of beauty where people can soften and kind of tap in to what is present for them. And part of that ritual is helping people turn towards the natural world as an ally in their grief, their continued walk with grief, and through our lives, right? So a lot of work kind of one-to-one with the ocean, and then some work together as a community and sharing, retelling our stories and creating a collective altar and those kinds of things. So there's many different forms of circles. Those are two that I have been hosting and love myself.
Yeah. They sound so transformative. And I could picture that the first one that you said of like the village and going around. And then when you're feeling grief, you go up to the altar. I think that would be something that I would be so interested in doing. And I went from this like positive person, like I said in the beginning, to someone who deeply feels that like I cry now more than I ever have in my whole life. And I've opened up so much, especially in my journal, about anything that I'm feeling. However, I still feel like it would take a lot for me to sign up for something like that. So I'm curious, like I still have resistance of, oh, but I can't do that. Like I'm not there yet. So especially for somebody who's listening that might be considering going to something like that or has it on their heart, like they know that they need that, but they need to that little push of like, what do they need to hear or believe about themselves or know in order to sign up for something like that, to gain the courage to do that?
Yeah. Well, like a few things. One is that the circles are, I find that it can be helpful to come to a grief ritual with a little bit of space between you and the loss. If there's a really extreme loss that you're navigating, it can be hard to have to hear other people's stories of loss and hold space for other people. So sometimes, depending, I suggest that there's a little bit of time between, and that's not a hard rule at all. But I have heard feedback that it can be hard to have to hear other stories when yours is so much to hold. And then I would say that grief looks like all different things. It took me years to be able to cry at a grief ritual or to make any sound. Like I am I've been very private in my grief. I've been very kind of closed down. Like I can feel sad, but to like have tears and cry in front of other people was not something that was familiar to me. I am from Michigan. We are Midwestern. We do not show our feelings or express that openly. So just knowing that whatever form your grief looks like and takes is super welcome. That can be silent, that can be loud, that can be tears or no tears, it can be song, it can be across the board. And so that being said, I also find like coming with the interest or the intention of curiosity, even if you're like, I don't have a specific thing or mine's not big enough or whatever it is, but coming with the like, I'm curious what's here for me. I'm curious what may be given an opportunity to move in me by being in a space that is intentionally crafted to hold some of what I don't maybe express day to day, or I don't express with people I'm out having coffee with or whatever it might be. I'm just like, okay, I'm just going into a different kind of space with curiosity of what might present itself for me. Yeah, and I agree with you about the positivity. I also can be very focused on positivity and action and transformation and growth. And the slowing down to like really let ourselves feel our own heartbreak about what is happening in the world or in our lives, what is actually happening to our families, to the people we love, feels like to me, it kind of feels like a responsibility in some of the way of like, how do we say thank you for this life? How do we say thank you for the gifts of our life? Part of it for me is also like, we slow down and we let ourselves be impacted by both like how joyful and grateful and blissful I feel as the spring takes hold and these flowers open and watching the mason bees come in and out of their little homes, and also like how sad it actually also is to be experiencing this level of destruction and war and everything else, right? Fear. And so I think of it as like a, a way of saying thank you for our lives and for the
Mhm.
gifts of our lives and for the relationships in our lives. Also, a big piece of it, to your point about grief coming with a lot of this like hard association stuff. I work a lot with people in creating remembrance rituals. And so when it comes to grief rituals and attending something like this, it's not only about making a space to feel the hard things and to grieve, but the other side of that, like the reason that grief can feel so hard is because of the depth of love and gratitude and because of what we want, because of what we love and what we want and what we want to believe in and what we wish for. And so also like crafting out that space, carving out that space of like, so me personally, like grief around my family taking a totally different form than I was expecting, is because of like a really beautiful longing. And so like honoring that longing in ourselves, honoring the beautiful person who wished for that, who wants that, and when it comes to a physical death, like missing that person or that animal is like, wow, the other side of that is like what we so deeply have loved and gotten to witness and gotten to be in relationship with in an intimate and beautiful, impactful way. So some of those pieces like really come to life through grief ritual, as well as a really strong, often people walk away feeling a strong sense of clarity and a really strong sense of belonging, of like, whoa, I just got to go there and be
Mhm.
held and survive and be okay and walk away feeling so much lighter.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So you mentioned remembrance ritual. Is that different than a grief ritual? Is that like the opposite of that?
Not exactly. I speak to, I host, I think it's remembrance and grief ritual can be the same.
Hmm.
Um, I'm often thinking about them as remembrance rituals, especially when we're talking about physical deaths, because I want to help support my clients not only in the grief of like, I'm walking in the store and the song comes on and I'm overwhelmed with a huge wave of grief. And that feels really derailing and takes me off center. And it's hard to keep going in my life when I'm scared of that happening. So I try to also anchor the grief and the overwhelm and all of those emotions with making intentional spaces to honor what we loved and still love and long for, that's connected to the loss. So in case of it being a physical death, a remembrance ritual might be like creating a little altar in our house with a photo or with candles or with some things that our person maybe used to love. Could be like they used to love drinking coffee, so I'm going to put a cup of coffee on the altar or whatever it might be, and to make time in our lives to sit and be with some of what we loved so much about them or what they loved so much about life. So that could be like they loved playing chess or they loved this type of food. And so I'm going to go in a remembrance and in a way of celebrating them. I'm going to go eat their favorite dish because I get to be embodied. I get to have the sensual experience of being a human. So I'm going to enjoy that on their behalf and in remembrance of them. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about and talking about when I
Yeah.
say remembrance
I love
ritual.
that. Yeah. So you said something earlier about how people experience grief differently. And I'm just curious if you've ever had to help someone who maybe had a partner or was a part of a family dynamic where they experienced grief very differently. And how do you navigate that? So maybe it was like a physical death or maybe like the life or politics or anything where like I feel like usually one person feels really deeply and then one person shuts it out or shuts down or pretends it didn't happen or doesn't want to talk about it. Have you ever navigated that with somebody? And how do you do
Yeah,
that?
that's so common. Thanks for speaking to that. That's so common, and it's such a huge challenge. It can be such a huge challenge in small, close circles, such as family units and close friendships. Um, and so I personally believe that we can do anything if we create appropriate containers to do so. And when I say that, I mean like having agreements. And we do this a lot in the grief circles, and I imagine that to be a practice for in our personal lives. So, for example, a container might be like maybe I call you up, Samantha, and I say, "Hey, do you have 30 minutes where you can just listen to me? And I don't want any solutions. I don't want you to try to make me feel better. I actually am fine and I don't need to be made to feel better. I just am looking for you to witness like what I'm feeling right now, and don't even ask any questions. Do you have capacity for that?" Right? So like that is an example of creating a container. Or it might be like, "Hey, do you have an hour where we can both share, where I'm going to share for the first 10 minutes without you responding at all, and then you're going to share for 10 minutes, and then we're going to put on music and dance, or we're going to journal and then walk in nature," or something. Again, like setting the expectation so that I can show up with my grief in its own form, and know that you're going to be the space holder. Kind of like we have a bit of roles
Mm-hmm.
defined, and then we'll shift to that. So that's like one really important piece. That might mean that, let's say you and I are both grieving this same loss, and when it's really hot for both of us, we might not be able to be each other's person. We
Mm.
might not be able to hold space for each other. A lot of my work with hospice, I remember like very early on, we talked about this ring theory where the person in the center going through it, the person who is dying, they needed to have a circle, concentric circles outward, right? So there's the center person, and their grief and their feelings move outward to their closest people. And then that outer ring has to have a circle outside of them. Like we're moving the energy and the grief outward. We can't be pouring back into the people more and more
Wow.
impacted. And so that's another thing to consider, is making sure we are resourced beyond those most impacted, and to really start to sense for ourselves what we have capacity for. So if someone close to us is like, "Hey, do you have capacity to listen for 10 minutes?" and you don't, to say, "Oh, thank you so much for asking, and I'm really sorry, but I don't have capacity." I've heard so commonly that, well, it's so common that we accidentally hurt each other when we're grieving. Like someone who's grieving gets hurt or feels dropped by their people because their people don't know how to support them. And I've also heard what a gift it is for those who are the loved ones of somebody grieving to hear from the griever really explicitly how to support them. "Hey, can you just listen?" Or, "Hey, can you just come on a walk with me, and or ask me questions about my person, or tell me stories that you remember about my person," or
Mm.
but being
Yeah.
really explicit and direct can be such a gift to the people who love you and want to support you when you're grieving but might not know how.
Yeah. I've heard that not in the sense of grief, but just supporting someone honestly in business when somebody's just looking for we especially for fixers and people pleasers, we always assume that somebody is looking for an answer or to for a solution to something. And so sometimes in business and in life and even grieving, we jump to, oh, well, let's do this instead or try this. And so I've heard to say that or to ask that instead of, I just want to do this. I don't need any advice. I don't need any answers. I'm just looking for a listening ear. And I've been doing that with my sister and sometimes my mom too. And it's been so helpful, but it just is so nice, like you said, to be like, okay, well, as the receiver of that, when my sister asks me that or tells me that, I can take off my fixer hat and I can truly just listen and be there for her in the way that she needs. And we both feel like it's a better a better dynamic in that instance. So I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm so glad to hear you do that. We, at all of my grief circles and rituals, we do an exercise that is in a triad form. So three people, each person has 10 minutes to talk, and the other two are just listening. They don't say anything ever, even after the 10 minutes is up. And if you finish before the 10 minutes, then you sit in silence. We don't move on until the whole 10 minutes. And people often like hate the idea of it before we start because they're like, I didn't come with anything prepared, which is like totally the point
Right.
of just having that amount of space where no one's going to interrupt you, even the good responses to be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I really get that, or oh, that sounds really hard. There's going to be no response, and so you have this space and more is able to surface, and it can be really surprising and really like, whoa, I didn't know that was there. But it can be such an easy kind of exercise that people take to then do in their personal lives, and it can be so connective, to your point, so much more of the sense of being known or being seen or understood, and also on the listener side, the sense of like, I'm being invited in to this person's
Yeah.
moment. And what they need from me is my presence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my presence is enough. My presence is the medicine. That is the thing that we're quote unquote, doing and offering. That is our action.
Yeah. Honestly, it was very challenging for me
Yes.
to not even ask questions. Like, not the solutions was okay, but it's natural for me to at least ask a question or dig deeper. So it's been difficult to practice it, but really insightful and interesting. So I love the nothing, like saying nothing at all. It seems really interesting too. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what are ways that we can all start to incorporate this into our life, whether it be just starting to express our emotions or like this, like a container where we find somebody and we can ask them, what is your capacity for me to share this with you? Or some of the rituals that you've talked about, or do you have some ways that we can start to do that in our like day-to-day lives or when we are experiencing grief?
Yeah. I think it's really important for us to um, think of grief as something that's needing our tending. It's a participatory relationship. So like thinking about our relationship with our own grief and how do we tend our grief, and grief is not something that happened in the past. There's something that happened in the past that grief is connected to, but it impacts our everyday moving forward. We now live every day without that person or without that animal or without the dream idea of what we thought our family would be, right? And so it's an ongoing and very present and future based relationship. And so the first thing is really to acknowledge that we have to keep coming back. We have to keep checking in of like, how does my heart feel about these losses that happened last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? That feels like a big, important piece, as well as the like retelling of our story. How we tell our story and retell our story is really important for our belief system and what we believe is possible, and how we can live our most vibrant and on purpose lives. So coming back again, revisiting the losses and revisiting the grief, and retelling our stories are some of the personal ways I would encourage. Like, I work a lot with altars, and that can be very elaborate or very casual, but even just having a space in our house where we have photos or objects connected to who we've been, or connected to what we longed for, connected to the people and beings that we've lost, that we can return to and remember in a regular way, so that we don't have to feel so disconnected, but we're still impacted every day. And our grief is an expression of our love. And bringing those together is really helpful. So it's not like, I don't want to go there because it hurts. It's like, this hurt is the form of my love right now.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's uncomfortable, but also knowing that is a helpful way of revisiting. And so then, yeah, thinking about your people, your communities, and like who you can ask for support, and what kinds of support. But would really invite people to be gracious with themselves, because there is a pressure that you, quote unquote, like, need to know what you need, or like that you should know what you need. And we don't really know what we need. We have to try it out. So like, thinking about what it might be, and trying, like, asking for support, and you'll learn more of like, ooh, I did not like that. That's not actually helpful for me. I want to try something else in the future. But thinking about containers, because the strength of the container dictates how deep it's safe for us to go, how vulnerable it's safe for us to share. And so, like, tracking that within ourselves of like, do I feel like slowing down? Can I go? Is it comfortable for me to go deeper here or not? And honoring that as you continue to refine and explore the parameters of the container of like, is it a 10-minute phone call, or does it need to be in person, or does it need to be with someone who knew the person I'm grieving and we can share stories with, or does it need to be with someone who's going through a similar loss as I am, or does that not matter? So that's a pretty ambiguous answer to your question.
No, I love that answer. And it reminds me of inside one of my group coaching containers, there's a woman in there who has MS, and something that she's been working on is getting more comfortable with her new lifestyle since she had a recent flare, and getting comfortable with others knowing about it. And she had this realization that she's kind of been shutting herself and others out of fear of judgment. And so in one of our journaling sessions, she came up with the idea herself to draw like a thermometer starting, I think the bottom color was yellow, and then it was orange, and then it was red. And that was the varying degrees of difficulty to get her to open up and do certain activities. And the yellow was, I think, going out to a coffee shop maybe with a very close friend who already knew about her MS, but just to get out into the world. And then the second step was bringing family members who didn't yet know about her recent flare over to her house to let them know and fill them in. And then she had like steps of doing this. So that's when you said, is it a phone call? Is it in person? That kind of reminded me of it could be all of it. And like you said, try on different hats of what feels good. And then maybe you'll want to, quote unquote, advance to something else and see how that feels. But I also love what you said of how people, quote unquote, don't want to go there with grief. I hear that so often with any challenging emotion of grief, anxiety, depression, and literally any challenging emotion. People just don't want to go there. But after this conversation with you, it feels like it's the most loving thing that you can do to go there with grief. And so your perspective on this was just so insightful and almost light. Light is the word that's coming to me. So I so appreciate your expertise and your perspective on all of this. It was beautiful.
Thank you. I love talking about it. I'm so glad to get to talk about it with you. And I think that piece, what you're describing, the go there, like, yeah, not wanting to go there. Um I also feel like it's important to be tracking ourselves instead of like forcing and pressuring ourselves to go all of the way there when we don't feel safe to. Like, I think about it as like water, and the water pressure builds, right? But we can either like turn on the hose all of the way, but we can also find other channels or other like outlets to release some of the pressure. So inviting people to like think about, is there a little bit of a pressure release that is available to me so that I'm not building. Though there can be benefit in also the big going there when you feel safe too. That's why these grief rituals, and especially weekend grief rituals, where you have this container really being built and really designed to hold all of the pressure, all of that pressure release
Mm-hmm.
is a potentially beautiful and powerful way to really go there. But yeah, the gifts of going there and the honoring of going there and the understanding the depth of our love and capacity for love in going there feels really like a beautiful, honestly for me, like a beautiful and a necessary part of the equation with belonging, the equation of
Mm.
belonging. And like, how do we feel belonging in our world? How do we create belonging? To me, grief tending in community is a practice of belonging. And so, anyways, yeah, that going there with grief in all these different ways, small and big ways, and turning to our communities and our people, and creating containers, trying things out, and creating moments of remembrance.
Yeah.
I'm talking a lot about rituals that are like that are kind of planned and organized, but there are beautiful, spontaneous rituals that can just sprout up also when we're paying attention. Um, and listening to all of those things.
I like what you said too about how it doesn't need to be going there and opening the floodgates too, because another thing that I hear a lot is how when people, I hear this with journaling, but people fear that when they start to journal, AKA when they open up their hearts and minds, they just automatically assume that it is opening up the whole ocean and everything's going to come pouring out. But it's you brought awareness to the fact that it doesn't have to be. It could just be like a little stream, and then you slowly build on that. And these rituals are a great way to do it and trying out different ways to see what you like as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for speaking to that. And so much of it is about building trust with ourselves. So if
Mm-hmm.
you are approaching your journal and you have that fear around going there and being completely overwhelmed with it, you can make a little agreement with yourself of like, I am going to write for 10 minutes. I know that won't be all of it, but I'm going to, when I get to this 10 minutes, I'm going to just like honor what has shown up, knowing that there's a lot more, and making some agreement with myself about how or when I'm going to come back to that more and continue tending that more. So maybe it is a weekly or daily practice, or maybe it is like, wow, much more has shown itself here. I realize I want community support. I want a different type of container, and I'm going to, you know, commit to myself or care for myself in this way by like deciding that I'm going to go into a community container by the end of the year, or I'm going to share my writing, or I'm going to whatever it might look like. But the building trust with yourself of like, I can go there, like watching ourselves go there in small ways and be like, oh, okay, there's more, and I will come back and I will keep tending.
So beautiful. I keep thinking of more questions and more ways to compliment you, but I'll stop here. Where can people find you when they decide they want more information on all of your things?
Thanks. My website is alyssarosehealingarts.com, and I post most of my upcoming events and gatherings on Instagram, which is Alyssa Rose Healing. And my email is all connected to that, alyssarosehealingarts@gmail.com. And yes, please reach out for any conversations or questions around grief. Often people are like, what kind of container should I seek if I'm going through X, Y, or Z thing. So I love this work. I learn so much from everyone I work with. And so don't hesitate to reach out. And thanks for having me today.
Yes, thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you everyone for listening. If you listened and made it all the way to the end, be sure to screenshot any part of this episode and tag both Alyssa and myself. We both love seeing that you listened and would love to see your takeaways. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining me for today's journal entry. If something resonated with you, I'd love to know about it. Screenshot this episode, share it on social media, and tag me at samantha.s.says. Or even leave a review, which will help more women find this podcast to create more fulfillment in their career and as a mom. And hey, if you're thinking, I wish I could get more of this, I've got you covered. Click on the link in the show notes, which I customize each week based on what we're talking about. And I always include the link to the Calm Mind Blueprint, which are my 5 journal prompts to go from overwhelm to inner peace in 2 to 10 minutes a day. Subscribe so that you catch my Thursday 5-minute journal with me episodes and next week's full episode where we will continue this journey together. I'll see you then.